Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Today I'm going to be talking about states of mind, specifically Mushin, Zanshin, Shoshin, and Fudoshin. These are usually translated as no mind, remaining mind, beginner's mind, and a movable mind. It's very easy to hear these phrases and imagine that we're talking about four different mental states. And it's really easy to make them into some kind of special mental states we're trying to achieve or attain. Something that's elevated that we don't have, that we have to go and get. But in practice, that's not really how these terms function. Terms like Mushin, Zanshin, Fudoshin, and Shoshin do not point to separate mental states, but to different facets of living awareness. Mushin names a mind that is free from fixation. Zanshin describes continuity of awareness. Fudoshin expresses steadiness in the midst of challenge. And Shoshin reveals openness from moment to moment. Taken together, they give us a vocabulary for how awakened mind actually functions, not just in meditation, but hopefully in everyday life. You might notice that all of these sound pretty similar, and that's because they're all made up of two characters and they all share the same second character, which is Shin. The character for heart mind, not just intellect. So when we say Mushin, it's not really no mind like no intellect, it's no mind heart. When we say Shoshin, it's not just beginner intellect, it's beginner mind heart. It's a really important thing to keep in mind as we investigate this. This is a whole being activity. This is not an intellectual activity. For me, this discussion pretty naturally bridges Zen practice and martial arts practice, which are two big aspects of my life. Mushin and Zanshin get a lot of airtime in martial arts. But while martial arts is major Dharma gate for me, this way of thinking goes into every aspect of everyday life. My hope is that it gives us hints about how these ideas apply outside of monasteries or the dojo, right into the nitty grittiness and the stresses of ordinary life. After all, Dogen wrote about Shoshin, and so did the samurai. And if it was good enough for Dogen and samurai, it's probably got something good enough for us. Little bit of background. It's not going to be a history lecture. Historically, samurai of the Sengoku, which is the warring period, and the Edo period, which is the peace period that came right after, were exposed to Zen Buddhism along with Shinto and Confucian classics. Some of the overlap we see between Zen and martial traditions in Japan is just the broader cultural kind of flavoring, right? The broader cultural feeling making its way in. But some of it is also that Zen's unique way of understanding mind, Shin, mind heart, lent particularly well to an elite warrior class that, at least philosophically, prized duty, honor, and even dying well over self-preservation. I think anytime we talk about that, it's worth mentioning that this relationship did get badly distorted going into World War II. Right? We never forget about those things that happen. But historically, it was much more nuanced and personal than that. One of the clearest figures at this crossroads talking about these aspects with Zen and martial arts is Takuin Soho. I've talked about him before. I often turn to a book called The Unfettered Mind when I'm investigating these concepts, both because it's one of the clearest examples of Zen influence on martial traditions, and because the ideas are not meant to apply, or the ideas are meant to apply beyond formal Zen practice. This is not really about Zen or swords so much as it is about our relationship with our own mind. Takuin was born in 1573 to a samurai family that ended up on the losing side of the Unification Wars. That means he was born into a noble family who then lost everything. And he was a young and then a middle-aged man in the transition to peacetime. He lived through Japan's transition from constant warfare to centralized rule, peace, and a very strict social hierarchy and economic growth. And while all of that sounds good, massive societal change is still massive societal change. Whatever we might think about this, big change is often very unsettling. And I think we can probably all relate to massive social change and uncertainty. It said that Takuin sought to infuse the spirit of Zen into everything that caught his interest: calligraphy, poetry, gardening, and the arts in general. And he did the same thing with swordsmanship and how he thought samurai should um, manage their estates. Takuin returns to Mushin, or no mind, over and over again. So, talking about Mushin. Mushin contains the character for not or without, and then Shin, which is heart mind. This is one of the most misunderstood terms in Zen and in martial arts. Mushin does not mean blankness. It does not mean some kind of a mental trance, and it does not mean suppressing thought. It's very important. Mushin means the mind that does not stop. This idea eventually influenced many aspects of culture and arts. This kind of effortless state of no mind, which is cultivated by artists, poets, craftsmen, who may or may not be associated with Buddhism or Taoism, means the state at which a master is so at one with his art that his or her body naturally and spontaneously responds to all challenges without thought. Right? Sounds good. And we could compare it to what modern athletes talk about, the flow state or being in the zone, right? You sometimes hear people interviewing athletes and they're like, the ball just caught itself, right? It just happened. Classic Zen talks about this in a variety of ways. Huangbo warns against clinging even to emptiness. Chan and Taoist texts talk about this and similar ideas, but Dogen had something to say about this concept of Mushin. But he's very careful. He almost never uses the term Mushin. When he gestures towards it, he does so kind of indirectly and sometimes critically. For him, no mind it's not blankness and it's not the absence of thinking. He gives us an example. He gives us this very famous formula. I think you've all heard this before. Thinking, not thinking. How do you think not thinking? Non-thinking. Right? So if you have this idea of I'm going to suppress thoughts, well, that's a thought, right? You're thinking about not thinking. That's not it, right? We're not squishing. We're not trying to eliminate the mind. We're trying to have a mind that functions without fixation. So if we fixate on I should have an empty mind or no thoughts, then we just found a new thought to fixate on. So that's not what we're talking about. Dogen emphasizes something called non-abiding awareness, the mind that does not latch on to thoughts, not thoughts about emptiness, not thoughts about stillness, not thoughts about insight, or the idea of no mind itself. Any of those are just things we're latching onto. Yagi Munenori was a samurai and a swordsmanship instructor for the shogun that exchanged letters with Takuin Soho. And he describes it like this: it is your ordinary, everyday mind. So when we make coffee or tea in the morning, without rushing, without narrating, without judging, that's it. You just make tea. One of my favorite examples is adjusting your pillow in the middle of the night. We hold this up as an example of compassion a lot, but it's a good example of Mushin. We don't intellectualize about the pillow, right? We come up with grand theoretical ideas about its pillowness. We don't plan the movement of my arm. I'm gonna activate the deltoid muscle. We don't judge ourselves for being uncomfortable. That's an important one. We just reach back and adjust it and go back to sleep. And often we don't even remember doing it. That's Mushin. It's ordinary, natural. Nothing special, exactly what the situation is called for. I think this is why Dogen avoids presenting Mushin as something to be attained. Because the moment we think we've achieved no mind, that thought itself is already extra. I think we've already probably Has anybody here ever been in the zone and then thought, oh, I'm really in the zone, and then you fall flat on your face? As soon as you think it, you're out of it, right? So it can't be a special state we attain. It has to just be ordinary. Takuin explicitly connects Mushin to Shoshin, beginner's mind. He says Mushin and Shoshin are connected. Shoshin is a combination of Sho, meaning beginner or initial, and Shin, heart mind. I'm going to harp on this a lot. It's important. Shoshin can often be misunderstood as ignorance, a lack of training, or being naive, but that's not what it's meant to be. Shoshin is the mind before it gets burdened by self-consciousness or rigid ideas. I'm going to say this again. I think a few of us need to hear this again. Shoshin is the mind before it gets burdened by self-consciousness. Takuin explains this really well. And so he's talking about sword fighting. As a beginner knows nothing of posture, how to hold a sword, his mind does not stop anywhere. As he studies various things and learns where to place his mind, he stops in many places. So he's gotten just enough intellectual understanding for his brain to get in the way all the time. Later, as practice matures, neither posture nor sword remains in the mind. So if you hand a little kid a stick and they are a Jedi master and they're just going for it, they're not judging, they're not thinking about it, they're just having a good old time. And then you give them 20 lightsaber lessons and then they're trying to do it right. And you see that spontaneity, at least for a while, get kind of contained, right? And then after you have eaten the teachings for a long time, they can go back to just being free because it's just in the body, right? This is being unburdened by self-consciousness or thoughts. The beginner is free because they don't yet know where to get stuck. The intermediate student becomes trapped by technique, correctness, and self-evaluation. Or by becoming so blinded by what we know that we can't see the reality of each moment as something new. We never replay the same moment, but the expert falls into the trap of thinking we do, that we've seen it all before. The mature practitioner gets to become free again. Not by forgetting what they learned, but by no longer being owned by it. So if you've hit the bell 1,000 times, it might be really easy to be like, I know how to hit the bell, and then you're not alive to hitting the bell. But we can renew our Shoshin, our beginner's mind. We have that chance every time. Right? I put on my shoes, I don't know how many millions of times. Did I look at my shoes when I put them on this morning? Or did I assume I knew my shoes and I knew what putting on shoes was, and I had no Shoshin when I engaged my shoes? Dogen makes a point about this in Hotsu Bodaishin, where he says that Bodhi mind is beginner's mind. And crucially, he says it must arise again and again, not just at the beginning of practice, but at every stage, even after realization. Shoshin is not something we outgrow. It's something that we lose, but we get to recover repeatedly over and over again. We always have a chance to refine our beginner's mind. So that takes us to Fudoshin, immovable mind. And this is in a chapter called The Immovable Wisdom of All Buddhas. Fudo is a state of equanimity or imperturbability, an immovable heart, and of course, Shin is mind heart. So we could say immovable heart mind, immovable being. A movable mind does not mean a rigid mind. Takuin is very clear. He says it moves, the Fudoshin, the immovable mind, moves as the mind is wont to move, forward or back, left or right, in the 10 directions and the 8 points, which is a fancy way of saying all the places, everywhere. And the mind that does not stop is called immovable wisdom. So that can sound confusing. How can a movable mind move however it wants? What's being expressed is a mind that is not knocked off base by events. We remain stable and free in the midst of events. We don't get pulled around by our thoughts, our emotions, or situations. The mind is free to function as it is wont to function. So we might say unshakable wisdom. The mountain is used as a metaphor a lot for equanimity, right? In Zen, and probably other places too, right? The mountain. But if you think about the mountain is made by the weather and the environment around it. When it rains, you have a wet mountain. When it's cold, when it's snowy, you have a cold mountain. When the river rushes through it, it changes the face of the mountain. But the mountain is always still the mountain. It's unshakable. It is fully engaged. It's not closed off. Equanimity is not putting on your armor and then never being affected by things. That's not equanimity. And that's not what the mountain does. The mountain is open and steady, right? That's way harder, I think, being open and steady. But that's why we have to have Fudoshin, unshakable wisdom. Takuin uses a really dramatic story. He says, if 10 men rush at you with swords and your mind stops at the first one, the rest of them are going to cut you down. So you can't stop, right? Got to be able to move in the 10 directions. But if your mind doesn't stop, you can respond to each one naturally. For most of us, this isn't about swords. For a couple of us in the room, it is actually. But for most of us, this is not about swords. It's about stress, conflict, fear, being overwhelmed. One of my favorite Fudoshin stories is one of our good friends, Ron, has a little daughter, and she's very strong-willed. So when she was about 3, she was playing outside, and it was time to go. And she kind of wasn't putting her toys away and wasn't going. And so Ron, as you do, as the dad, right, picks her up, says, nope, it's time to go. And this adorable little 3-year-old looks at him and goes, you're not the dad, you're a monster. And and in that moment, Ron could have gotten upset. He could have yelled at his daughter. He could have called her name back. He could have taken it really personal and been crushed. And what he was able to do was just be like, I understand those feelings. And then they got in the car, right? But so Ron was free to respond to his daughter who was calling him a monster with love and compassion and the firmness that was required to, we have an appointment, we have to go get in the car. So, swords are great, but sometimes it's your 3-year-old calling you a monster and you still responding with love and compassion and the firmness that's required. That's Fudoshin, not being knocked off base. I really love that Takuin warns us against false discipline in this matter in particular. Trying to force the mind into stillness, squish it down. This is possibly my favorite line in the whole book. He says, this is like trying to tie up a cat. If you restrain the mind artificially, it becomes even more trapped. So think about you put a cat on a leash and it's real offended and it's leaping around and it's tangling, but eventually it's going to be all tangled up, and it makes things worse when you try to artificially squish the mind, right? So in Takuin's example, the cat's not one of those cool harness trained cats. It's one of those like cats that's really offended at having a leash on it. And so it gets worse, it leaps around. It might even hurt itself, right? So this is false discipline, according to Takuin. This squishingness, that's not what we're talking about. And so true immovability is freedom, not suppression. I think any of these states of mind that are all one state of mind run the risk of us falling into this suppression, like I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to squish it. And I think if you've ever played sports or engaged in martial arts, you can't make the zone happen, right? If we go back to Mushin, you can't make it happen. You can practice, you can maybe be in a place that allows it to come up more often, but you can't make it happen. So in all of these, this is about freedom, not suppression or force. And then we come to Zanshin, remaining mind, remaining heart, remaining being. So the Japanese term Zanshin combines Zan with remaining and Shin, which is heart mind. It describes the quality of mind that does not collapse into distraction or conclusion even after an action is completed. In martial arts, it's the mind that remains present after releasing the arrow or finishing the strike. In Kendo, if you strike an opponent and then you lose attention, you don't get the point. You have to have all the aspects. So if you do not show Zanshin after you land a strike, you do not get the point. In Zen, Zanshin is discussed probably more implicitly. I don't think people at Oshigate have heard Zanshin super often, but it is expressed and taught all the time. It's trained constantly. How do you stand up after Zazen? They ring the bell. Oh, good, I'm done. No, right? They ring the bell. I'll show. Stand up. You brush off the cushion. If you have robes, you adjust your robes. If you have make sure everything's okay. How do you stand up after zazen? How do you bow? How do you leave the room? Do you just clomp out? Do you say goodbye to everybody? Do you bow when it's appropriate? Do you maintain your presence in the present moment when the specific activity you were thinking about being engaged in is done? That's Zanshin. That sounds a lot like a lot of Zen practice, doesn't it? And Dogen talks about this in a lot of places, but I think a clear example is Gyoji, continuous practice. Dogen says continuous practice is not something done by oneself, it's something done by all Buddhas. So all Buddhas are engaged in Zanshin. All of us are engaged in Zanshin. Practice doesn't stop. Awareness doesn't end just because the bell rings. And Zanshin is how we know all that other stuff is real. If your awareness drops away when the task ends, then your mind was being held by effort, right? Because remember, back to the cat. If you're on the cushion and you're like, must not think, will not think, and then the bell rings, okay, and then right, that's not really what we're trying to do. So that's a good hint that if your mind's kind of collapsing after zazen, maybe talk to one of the teachers and kind of talk about what's going on, because that's it. We're not trying to tie up the cat. That is not zazen. Or when we clean later today, right? We're not gonna be precious and like, oh, push the cushion, but we are gonna pay attention. But if you're like, and then you go off, that's probably not what we're trying to do, right? I'm not saying effort is not required, but it's not the suppression kind of effort. So when we bring these all together, Mushin is the mind that does not cling. Shoshin is the mind before habits harden. Fudoshin is the mind under pressure. And Zanshin is the mind of attention that continues without collapse. It's not four states to acquire, it's one way of functioning. Or as Tagwin puts it, when the mind does not stop anywhere, it is free. That freedom is what Zen is pointing towards, not just on the cushion and not just in the dojo, if you're a martial artist, but right in the middle of our lives. We engage fully, and we could maybe just say we engage fully with Shin. We don't have to always put a label on it, but it's engagement with freedom, not pressure. Thank you. Would you stop the recording?